It happened quietly. No breaking news banners, no emergency broadcasts. The mainstream media was too busy discussing celebrity scandals and political theater to notice that the bedrock of the American empire just crumbled. You are watching this? You are part of the few who actually sense the tremors before the earthquake hits. You feel it at the grocery store. You feel it when you look at your retirement savings. You feel that something fundamental has broken. And you are right. The global financial system changed forever just a few days ago, and almost nobody is talking about it. They tell you the economy is strong. They tell you inflation is under control. But they are not telling you the one piece of news that changes everything for your wallet, your 401k, and the future of this country. The 50-year agreement that made the United States the undisputed king of the global economy has officially expired. The petrodollar system is dead. For half a century, since 1974, every nation on Earth that wanted to buy oil had to do it in one currency, the US dollar. This wasn't just a trade agreement. It was the engine of American prosperity. It forced the world to hoard our currency. It allowed us to print trillions of dollars without suffering the consequences of hyperinflation immediately, because we could export our inflation to the rest of the world. We bought real goods, cars, electronics, resources from other countries, and in exchange, we gave them pieces of paper that we printed out of thin air. It was the greatest economic magic trick in history. But as of right now, that trick is over. Saudi Arabia has announced they will not renew the 50-year petrodollar agreement. They are now open to selling oil in Chinese yuan, euros, and even digital currencies. The monopoly is broken. The demand for the dollar is about to plummet. And when the world no longer needs our dollars to buy energy, those trillions of dollars are going to come flooding back home. This isn't just economic theory. This is a pattern we have seen before. It is the same mathematical sequence that destroyed the Spanish Empire in the 17th century and the British Empire in the 20th century. We are not approaching the collapse. We are living through the early stages of the final cascade. If you value the truth and want to understand the history that the news refuses to cover, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications right now. By doing so, you are joining a community of critical thinkers who refuse to be blindsided by history. Share this information, because the more people who understand this pattern, the better prepared we will be. Most Americans do not understand why their money is losing value. They blame corporate greed or temporary supply chains. But the root cause is structural. It is about the loss of reserve currency status. To understand the magnitude of what just happened, we have to go back to the desperate days of the 1,970 seconds. The United States was in a freefall. We had just abandoned the gold standard in 1971. The dollar was backed by nothing but faith, and that faith was evaporating. Inflation was skyrocketing. The stock market was crashing. The American century looked like it was ending. Enter Henry Kissinger and a secret meeting in Saudi Arabia. The deal was simple but ruthless. The U.S. would provide absolute military protection and weapons to the House of Saud. We would guarantee their survival against all enemies. In exchange, the Saudis would do one thing: price their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars and invest their surplus profits back into U.S. Treasury bonds. It was a masterstroke. Suddenly, every country needed dollars. If Germany wanted oil, they needed dollars. If Japan wanted energy, they needed dollars. This created an artificial, insatiable demand for our currency. It allowed the U.S. government to run massive deficits. We could spend more than we earned, year after year, decade after decade, funding massive military bases and social programs because the world absorbed our debt. They had no choice. That agreement was the foundation of the modern American lifestyle. It is why we can import cheap goods. It is why interest rates stayed low for so long. It is why the U.S. dollar is the weaponized currency of the world. But contracts have expiration dates, and geopolitics shifts. The Saudis have looked at the current state of America, our debt of $36 trillion, our political instability, our weaponization of the banking system, and they have decided to hedge their bets. They are joining BRICS. They are talking to Beijing. They are executing Project M-Bridge to settle payments digitally, bypassing the U.S. banking system entirely. The media silence on this is deafening, but it is not surprising. If they admitted the petrodollar was gone, they would have to admit that the primary mechanism holding down U.S. inflation is gone. They would have to explain that the exorbitant privilege of printing money without consequence has ended. Imagine a dam holding back a massive reservoir of water. That water represents the trillions of dollars held by foreign central banks and sovereign wealth funds. For 50 years, the petrodollar agreement was the concrete wall of that dam. Yesterday, the cracks turned into a breach. The water is starting to leak. At first, it will be a trickle. You will see gas prices tick up. You will see import prices rise. But eventually, as foreign nations dump their dollar reserves because they no longer need them for oil, that trickle will become a flood, a tsunami of currency returning to its issuer. And when too much money chases too few goods within our own borders, we will face an inflationary crisis that makes 2022 look like a minor inconvenience. This is not doom-mongering. This is historical precedent. When the British pound sterling lost its status as the primary global reserve currency, the UK didn't disappear, but its economy was hollowed out. Their standard of living stagnated. They went from being the masters of the world to an island nation struggling with debt. The United States is currently following that exact trajectory, but at a much faster speed and with much higher stakes. We have built an entire economy based on debt, assuming the world would always fund us. That assumption is now dead. The Federal Reserve knows this. The Treasury knows this. Why do you think central banks around the world have been buying gold at a record pace for the last 2 years? They are preparing for a post-dollar world. They are de-dollarizing their balance sheets while telling you that everything is fine. We need to talk about the concept of Triffin's dilemma. It sounds complex, but it is the key to understanding your future. It states that the country issuing the global reserve currency must run trade deficits to supply the world with liquidity. We have to export dollars so the world can use them. But eventually, this constant deficit undermines confidence in the dollar itself. It is a trap. The very thing that gave us power is now the thing destroying our economy. We have exported our manufacturing base to get cheap goods and exported our inflation to maintain power. Now, the manufacturing is gone, and the inflation is coming back. The cycle is closing. We are entering stage 5 of the empire collapse pattern, financialization and decay. Look at the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. They debased their currency, the denarius, mixing it with copper because they couldn't pay their legions. Prices skyrocketed. Confidence collapsed. The empire didn't fall in a day. It fell because its money became worthless. Look at the Dutch Empire. When the guilder lost its dominance to the pound, the Dutch Golden Age ended. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes terrifyingly well. The expiration of the Petrodollar agreement is the specific event that historians will look back on as the tipping point for the American dollar. It signals to the rest of the world, to China, Russia, India, Brazil, and the global south, that the era of American financial hegemony is over. They are building a new system, a system based on commodities, gold, and decentralized ledgers, not on the promises of politicians in Washington, D.C. You might be asking, what does this mean for me right now? It means the purchasing power of your savings is under immediate threat. It means that holding cash in a savings account is a guaranteed losing strategy over the next decade. It means that the cost of living is not going to go back down to 2019 levels. In fact, we are looking at a secular shift upward in prices for energy, food, and housing. The middle-class squeeze is about to tighten, but this isn't just about inflation. It's about control. As the dollar weakens internationally, the government will become more desperate to control capital domestically. This is why we see the push for CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. They need a way to trap capital within the system when the international exit doors are opening. This brings us to the most terrifying realization of all, one that most Americans are completely oblivious to. When the petrodollar dies, the demand for US debt dies with it. And when no one wants to buy our debt, the banking system inside the United States becomes a ticking time bomb. You might think, well, even if inflation is high, at least my money is safe in the bank. It's FDIC insured. This is the single greatest lie you have been told. The collapse of the petrodollar is the trigger event that will activate a legal framework that has been sitting in the shadows since 2010. It is called the bail-in. Most people know what a bailout is. That is when the government prints money to save failing banks, like they did in 2008. But a bail-in is different. A bail-in saves the bank by confiscating the money of its depositors. You need to understand the legal reality of your bank account. When you deposit money into a bank, legally, that money is no longer yours. You have just loaned your money to the bank. You are now an unsecured creditor. The cash in your account is technically an IOU. Under the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States, and similar laws passed in the UK, Canada, and Europe, banks are now legally empowered to convert your deposits into equity to save themselves from insolvency. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is the law of the land. And we have already seen the test run. Look at Cyprus in 2013. When their banking system collapsed, they didn't just print money. They locked the doors, They froze the ATMs, and then they took a percentage of deposits directly from people's accounts to recapitalize the banks. It was called a one-time stability levy. That was the blueprint. That was the rehearsal for what happens when a major reserve currency implodes. With the petrodollar gone, the liquidity that kept American banks afloat is drying up. The trillions of dollars that used to circulate globally are now trapped, and the pressure is building. This brings us back to the pattern. In every empire collapse, there comes a specific moment I call the internal turn. In the early stages of an empire, the wealth comes from outside, from conquest, trade dominance, or in our case, the petrodollar. But when that external flow stops, the empire doesn't just cut spending, it turns inward to feed itself. It begins to consume the wealth of its own citizens. We saw this in the French Empire right before the Revolution, when they confiscated church lands and private gold to back their failing assignat currency. We saw it in the Spanish Empire, when the crown began seizing private shipments of bullion from the Americas because they had defaulted on their debts. The United States is entering this phase. The weaponization of the banking system, the freezing of assets without due process, the proposals to tax unrealized capital gains, these are all symptoms of an empire that has run out of external road and is now looking at you, the citizen, as the piggy bank of last resort. The end of the petrodollar accelerates this. Without the automatic buyer for U.S. treasuries that Saudi Arabia provided, the Federal Reserve has to be the buyer of last resort. This creates a feedback loop of money printing that destroys the currency faster and faster. You must understand the psychology of the elite in this stage. They are not trying to fix the economy for you. They are trying to manage the decline to protect themselves. They know the mathematics of the debt. They know that $36 trillion can never be paid back in real terms. There are only two ways out. Default, which destroys the government's power, or inflation, which destroys your power. They will choose inflation every single time. They will choose to pay back the debt in worthless dollars. This is why the stock market keeps going up even though the real economy is crumbling. It's not growth. It's the currency losing value against assets. It is the crack-up boom described by Austrian economists. But here is where the silent media aspect becomes crucial. Why aren't they warning you about the bail-ins? Why aren't they explaining the implications of the Saudi move? Because the system relies on your confidence to function. If you realize that your bank account is actually an unsecured loan to an insolvent institution, you would pull your money out. That would cause the collapse they are trying to delay, so they keep the music playing. They talk about soft landings and transitory inflation. They distract you with culture wars. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations are accumulating gold at a rate we haven't seen in 50 years. China has dumped over $50 billion in U.S. treasuries. They are exiting the building before it burns down. The transition away from the petrodollar also means the end of the U.S. ability to sanction the world effectively. Our financial power came from the SWIFT system and the fact that everyone needed dollars. If nations can trade oil in yuan or gold, our sanctions become toothless. When an empire loses its economic teeth, it inevitably lashes out militarily or becomes draconian domestically to maintain control. We are seeing both. This creates a volatile environment where holding tangible assets is the only insurance policy. Let's look deeper at the history of the Spanish Empire's collapse, because the parallels to 2025 America are haunting. Spain had the petrodollar of its day, gold and silver from the New World. They thought the flow would never end. They built a massive welfare state, a massive military, and a massive bureaucracy. But they didn't produce anything. They imported everything because their currency was so strong. Sound familiar? When the gold flow slowed down, their economy evaporated overnight because they had no manufacturing base. They had forgotten how to make things. America has hollowed out its industrial base in the Rust Belt in exchange for financial dominance. Now that financial dominance is ending, we are left with the hollow shell. The service economy is an illusion of wealth. You cannot service economy your way out of a currency crisis. You need real assets, real production, real commodities. This is why the petrodollar was the linchpin. It allowed us to trade printed paper for real oil. Now that trade is over. We will have to trade real goods for real oil. And since we don't produce enough real goods to cover our consumption, our standard of living must fall to meet our production level. This is the great leveling that is coming. What makes this stage 5 of the collapse so dangerous is the speed at which it happens. Hemingway said, "Bankruptcy happens gradually, then suddenly." We have been in the gradually phase since 2008. The end of the petrodollar agreement is the starting gun for suddenly. The derivatives market, which is tied to interest rates and currency values, is a quadrillion-dollar bubble waiting to pop. As the dollar fluctuates wildly without the anchor of oil, these derivatives could unwind, triggering a liquidity crisis that makes 2008 look like a picnic. And in that crisis, remember what I told you about the bail-ins? The banks will not be bailed out by the taxpayers this time. The law says they will be bailed out by the depositors. You, the media, is silent because they are part of the establishment that needs you to stay invested in the system until the very last moment. They need you to hold the bag. So, what do you do when the bedrock of the global financial system cracks beneath your feet? Do you panic? Do you ignore it? No. You look at what the architects of this system are doing, not what they are telling you to do. While the Federal Reserve Chairman goes on television and tells you that the banking system is sound and resilient, central banks around the world are panic buying gold at the fastest rate since 1967. Think about that date. 1,967 was just before the last major collapse of the dollar standard that led to the end of gold backing. They know the cycle is turning. They are trading their dying paper promises for the only asset that has survived every empire collapse in human history: physical gold. This is your blueprint. The elites are de-dollarizing their own portfolios. They are moving into hard assets. In a stage 5 collapse, wealth is not destroyed, it is transferred. It transfers from those who hold paper assets, currency, bonds, savings accounts, to those who hold real assets. This is the great wealth transfer. The expiration of the Petrodollar deal is the starting gun for this transfer. If you are holding all your wealth in US dollars or dollar-denominated debt, you are the liquidity that the system will drain to keep itself alive. You are the one who will pay for the inflation. You are the one who will be bailed in. You must change your mindset from investing for profit to positioning for survival. The goal right now isn't to make a 10% return. It is to ensure your purchasing power doesn't go to zero. History teaches us that there are only a few lifeboats in a currency crisis. The first is precious metals. Gold and silver are not investments. They are insurance. They are the only financial assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. If the bank fails, your gold is still gold. If the dollar collapses, your silver is still silver. They are the enemies of the fiat system because they expose the devaluation of the currency. That is why the media mocks gold bugs, because if everyone bought gold, the game would end tomorrow. The second lifeboat is something that didn't exist during the fall of Rome or the British Empire, but fits perfectly into the pattern of seeking sovereignty: Bitcoin. I am not talking about crypto gambling or meme coins. I am talking about a decentralized, immutable ledger that no government can print, no bank can bail in, and no politician can debase. The breakdown of the petrodollar system is the ultimate use case for a neutral, global reserve asset that doesn't require trust in the US military to function. The US government knows this, which is why they are fighting it so hard with regulation, while simultaneously BlackRock and the institutional giants are quietly accumulating it. They want to own the lifeboat before they let you on it. We are moving into a multipolar world. The era of the single American superpower is over. This sounds frightening to those who grew up in the Pax Americana, but it is the reality of the historical cycle. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and their new members like Saudi Arabia are building a parallel economy. They are trading in local currencies, they are stockpiling commodities, they are building a commodity-backed system to challenge the debt-backed US system. When the petrodollar died yesterday, the bridge to that new world was officially opened. You have a choice to make right now. You can continue to believe the narrative that everything is fine, that the government will fix the inflation, and that your retirement account is safe. That is the easy path. It is the comfortable path. It is also the path that led the citizens of Rome, Weimar Germany, and Venezuela to ruin. They waited for the government to save them until their money was worth less than the paper it was printed on. Or, you can accept the harsh reality of the pattern. You can accept that the math of $36 trillion in debt is impossible to resolve without a currency collapse. If you choose the second path, you become your own central bank. You reduce your exposure to the banking system. You get out of debt, because in a deflationary crash or a credit freeze, debt is a shackle. You secure tangible assets, land, food, energy, metals. You educate yourself on how money actually works, not how the schools taught you it works. The petrodollar agreement was the anomaly. It was a 50-year experiment in paper money that has finally run its course. We are now returning to the historical mean. The volatility we are seeing in prices, in politics, in war, is the friction of that return. The silence of the media is your biggest indicator. When the most important economic event of the last 5 decades happens, and the news is talking about the weather, you know the distraction machine is running at full power. They are keeping the herd calm while the slaughterhouse is being built. Do not be part of the herd. The dollar didn't die with a bang. It died with a signature on a contract in Saudi Arabia that simply wasn't renewed. The consequences, however, will be loud. They will be felt in every paycheck, every grocery trip, and every pension check for the next generation. But here is the empowering truth. The pattern is predictable. Because human nature never changes, the stages of collapse never change. By understanding where we are, stage 5, financialization and decay, you can predict what comes next. Stage 6 is the crisis, usually triggered by a loss of faith in the currency. Stage 7 is the reset. We are speeding towards stage 6. This video is your warning. It is your invitation to step out of the matrix of debt and illusion. Don't let the end of the petrodollar be the end of your financial future. Let it be the moment you woke up. Let it be the moment you realize that no one is coming to save you, and that is okay, because you have the knowledge to save yourself. The American empire is entering its twilight, but for the prepared individual, the twilight is not the end. It is simply the transition to a new day. The chaos that is coming is a ladder for those who see it for what it is, a historical necessity. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you connect the dots that the media refuses to show, you know what to do. The answers to our future are not found in the daily news cycle. They are written in the past, and I will continue to help you decode them. Stay skeptical, stay prepared, and never forget, the pattern is undeniable.